Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. The War with that expansion is releasing actually so soon with the Season 1 content with a brand new raid, a new set of seasonal dungeons, and PvP content and rewards releasing soon after. And right now on the beta, this is crunch time. This is such a crucial moment where they're trying to get all our classes in tip-top shape in preparation to the actual expansion release. And a lot of those class changes, buffs, and little tunings have been done through hotfixes. No actual official blue post for us to take a look at. Hotfixes are a little bit more nebulous though. Sometimes they're in the beta, sometimes they get taken away the next day, so it's really hard to track exactly what has happened. But another one of the classes that has gotten really a ton of hotfixes recently has been the Windwalker Monks, specifically Windwalker Monks with the Shadowpan playstyle, a hero spec that I found actually not that impressive when I first checked it out, receiving some sizable improvements, and it's actually looking a lot more promising, leaving monks with potentially two viable hero spec options instead of just as a default conduit of celestials. And I want to take a much closer look at what happened to the class of monk over the past few weeks. As always, if you guys want to join me for more of these War Within class updates, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So normally when it comes to class videos, I start off normally with some of the more generalized changes like hero specs, for example. But for Windwalker in particular, I actually want to talk about the hero specs a little bit later because there's some significant changes that have been data mined but not really confirmed with any of these changes. As for the last few weeks, without us getting a proper official blue post, a lot of these little data mine things and hotfixes don't always stick around on the beta. So everything that we talk about here potentially could have been implemented a while ago and is just now making its way into the data mine nodes, or have been buffed recently but may not stick around in the future. But all we can do is take a look at what everything that has happened to Windwalker over the last few weeks, with kind of like, it seems that there's a new trend going on with them trying to improve the class a little bit further. Now, some of those data mine things have been apparently mastery got buffed up a little bit in its base value for Windwalker monks. A handful of classes also saw a couple of tunings like this. Nothing crazy, but it does improve the baseline starting value of that mastery. Then talents such as Rising Star, which actually improves the damage of your Rising Sun Kick. Apparently that got improved from 10% to 15%, which amps up Windwalker's single target a little bit. Also, apparently, Spinning Crane Kick got buffed through hotfixes at some point over the last 2 weeks, I think, or maybe past week. I'm not even exactly sure, but at some point, the damage of this ability has gone up, so it's even more AoE damage for Windwalker monks. Now, the class did see a variety of like 8% nerfs here and there all across the board over on the beta a while ago, and those notes did make their way over into the live pre-patch realms as of this week, which was a bit surprising because not a lot of players expected from Windwalker. Well, we didn't really see Windwalkers like stomping around. They weren't doing Duster Warlock numbers, Arcane Mage numbers, or any of the Frost Death Knights by any measure, which had been top for like weeks now. So it was surprising to see Windwalker just getting like a 8% nerf across the board. However, they did receive a bunch of new little updates, more like quality of life increases when it comes to their talent trees. Just very selective hand few, but a lot of them like really start to stack up, and quite a lot of them start to feel pretty good down the line. Things like Touch of the Tiger improves the damage of your Tiger Palm from 25% to 40%. And with their tiers, so that's kind of focused a little bit, at least around Tiger Palm. Tiger Palm enabling the damage buff for your next ability, but also other abilities that are not Tiger Palm, amping up the damage of a Tiger Palm, stacking, causing it to also cleave to nearby targets. So there's a little bit of synergy there in terms of that single target that feeds into AoE damage. Little things like Hardened Souls, crit strike chance has been increased for Blackout Kicks, which is again more single target and cleavy type of damage. Your Russian Jade Wind damage has been increased by 30%, an ability you don't always really get a lot of benefit from unless you're playing something like Conduit Celestials, where Russian Jade Wind lasts as long as Zuen or the White Tiger is active. So there's actually quite a bit of synergy in that regard specifically. Things like Memory of the Monastery, if you talent into it, now give you a bit of a higher chance for Tiger Palms to activate Blackout Kick proc, which allows it to be free, and also has a stacking haste component, which is also quite interesting. Speaking about Zuen's Bond has also got buffed up a little bit, where it still has kind of a mediocre cooldown reduction, which is actually noticeable. Like, it's not great cooldown reduction, but it is kind of nice in terms of the quality of life stuff. But now Zuen does 30% more damage instead of originally 15, which Zuen is a significant portion of your overall damage as a Windwalker monk. It is a significant cooldown during very key situations. So having Zoen do a little bit more damage, especially as monks are going a little bit more haste heavy as of recently, it does make the pet and the burst that it provides a bit more effective. Certain talents like Meridian Strikes, for example, have gotten better cooldown reduction for your Touch of Death. And that can actually be quite good because there's even an affix where you get to summon this version of Xalatath that has no health but like a huge shield. So any shield breaking talents, so you're thinking of Evokers, Warriors, and Shadow Priest specifically, they can eat away shields a little bit more aggressively, which is a very unique mechanic. I kind of love that handful of classes have that. It's it's something that they're really considered in terms of really trying to implement it into the game, so you have classes that can get benefits from that directly. Meridian Strikes is a pretty good one because Xalatath has no health, but you can touch it death or dealing a ton of damage. I think breaking through the shield and one-shotting her, or almost one-shotting her by getting her very, very close, and it's a fantastic tool to be used with that affix specifically. Spinning Crane Kick got buffed up, but also Crane Vortex saw a bit of a damage buff as well, from a 20% damage buff to 30%, even more damage as well, as a change to Darting Hurricane, a very, very weird talent that actually plays really well into this haste focused monk gameplay. And we'll talk about why monks are going so heavily into haste, but Darting Hurricane is an interesting one where after Strike of the Windlord, or randomly whenever you use damage and abilities, you have a chance to gain a stack of Darting Hurricane. With Darting Hurricane, the global cooldown of your next 2 Tiger Palms is reduced by 50%. So I think it's per stack. All it essentially does is, normally abilities have like a GCD to them, right? So like, let's say you wanna go for Tiger Palm and then Blackout Kick and then Tiger Palm, and there's an obvious GCD there. But if you press the ability of Strike of the Windlord, your next 2 Tiger Palms can be cast really quickly, and you can follow up with another ability right after you use the Tiger Palm. So the global cooldown for these abilities is actually a lot shorter, which is very unusual, by the way. Incredibly unusual. I think you might have seen one of the new updates that have happened to the beta, by the way. That one looks pretty exciting, but we'll talk about it in a second when we talk about Shadow Pam. But it's a very interesting talent that actually is kind of nice. I'm very surprised, as long as you can play into a haste heavy build as a monk, because energy is a bit harder to come by ever since they did the whole rework for the War Within. Haste as a stat became a lot more valuable, especially with talents such as dual threat, where your auto attacks have a chance to kick the target instead of punching them, increasing your damage. Then you have momentum boost, which has haste directly scaling with the damage, or haste help its Fist of Fury scale with its damage based on the haste value. And then after Fist of Fury, you proceed to auto attack the target at lightning speeds, which can let you proc certain other abilities. Windwalker does scale a lot better with haste, and with haste it feels really fast paced. But this talent with this global cooldown, it is incredible how lightning quick you can be with the damage that you can put out. The quick jabs, or Tiger Palms, I love when I call them jabs. And if you play the Miss Pandaria as a monk, then you know exactly why I'd call it a jab. But Darting Hurricane is a very interesting talent, and with the rest of the other talents that have gotten changed up, I mean, there's some nice little synergies there. Zoen getting it back a little quicker, but having Zoen be a little bit more amped, that's also not terrible at all either. The set of talents that they got, even though the monk has seen damage nerfs baseline, the talents do help increase their damage quite a bit. And overall, when it comes to actually testing a monk, when it comes to dungeons, at least on the beta, it doesn't really feel that bad to play whatsoever. Besides this, for Windwalker, one of the most significant changes that have happened to them recently, I don't exactly know when recently, but recently, has been changes to the Shadow Pan playstyle, which has been severely behind compared to Conduit of Celestials, which has flavor, which has a powerful ability that does millions and millions of damage. It is incredible. And the interaction with all the Celestials, there's so much goodness to it. It is bursty, it is effective, it creates a big burst window with massive cooldown reduction that allows you to really have some skill expression. And compared to that, Shadow Pan has been one of the more boring playstyles for like a long while. That wasn't interactive with the Windwalker gameplay. It is just passively there, amping up all of your damage and abilities, but it wasn't interactive in any way. However, they've done a lot of work for Shadow Pan to make it much better. And this week, whenever they did a lot of these Shadow Pan changes, again, with hotfixes, it's really hard to exactly track when this happened, but they really trying to make Shadow Pan a good at least a solid playstyle, and I really do think they've done some good here. Starting off with just the flavor alone, as a Shadowpan monk, your main ability is Flurry Strikes, which allows you to generate charges of flurry for a set amount of damage that scales with your attack power, and for every certain amount of energy spent, you unleash all of those Flurry Strikes. Essentially for Woundwalker, how that translates is with your Tiger Palm, at least my current Tiger Palm being 55 energy, every 6 Tiger Palms, you unleash Flurry Strikes. And based on the damage that you do, you collect a charge of Flurry Strikes, which you can see collects rather quickly. Like, I mean, Fist of Fury could basically stack up all 10 of them very, very fast. And if I were to spend all of that energy, did you see that animation? It's so good. Those are the Flurry Strikes. These are the strikes that monks get to use now. That is the animation behind that ability, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I don't know when this happened. I've literally never seen this ability before, but now if you spend enough energy, you get this literal flurry of strikes in front of your character. Look at that, it looks so good. It's such a minor thing, but it makes it so much better. It is so fun to play around, and it looks good. You don't necessarily notice it in dungeons because there's a lot of animations going off over that time anyway, but if you're a stickler for having flavor with a hero spec, I mean, they really call this ability a flurry of strikes, and when it procs, your monk really does go off. The damage that it does is still kind of very, very mediocre. Like right now it looks really good, but if you were to take it like for the overall within the dungeon that I did, yeah. Well, actually, there is a way to make the damage better with one of the procs from Shadowpan, but most of the damage is going to look like these low numbers. Not this purple bar, but these low bars. This is the average of damage, though it can do a bit of damage as well. And the way that they fixed up the whole Shadowpan playstyle, there's now a bit of that gameplay loop. Essentially, they adjusted the rate at which you get Flurry Strikes. So basically every 6 Tiger Palms, I would call it jabs, you get Flurry Strikes. Once you activate 10 Flurry Strikes, which is really easy to reach all 10, you activate the buff Wisdom of the Wall. Every 10 Flurry Strikes, essentially every 6 jabs, you get the proc of Flurry Strikes, which activates Wisdom of the Wall. So every 6 Tiger Palms activates Wisdom of the Wall. You can kind of think of it that way. You gain one of the following buffs: either 30% crit strike damage increase, which is why I've seen monks doing some really wacky stuff, and I love checking out the beta realms and the logs in particular, seeing what builds everybody's running. So when I saw a monk running a Giga Haste, Giga crit build, I had to give it a try, and it was actually so fun. But you can also do a 30% additional crit strike damage with Wisdom of the Wall buff. Yeah, the buff can either be the crit strike damage, or dodge and critical strike chance is increased by a portion of your versatility, or Flurry Strikes deal additional shadow damage to all uncontrolled enemies, which sounds a little odd. I'm sure they'll like change it to all enemy targets within 6 yards, but it does now quite a bit of a decent damage, and also a decent AoE damage when you get the Shadow Flurry Strikes damage, or you increase the effectiveness of your mastery by 25%. So Wisdom of the Wall is this buff that essentially rotates every 6 Tiger Palms. So you got a gameplay element now with Shadowpan. Not only do you have a cool animation, but every 6 Tiger Palms, you get a sick out of a buff, and these can even overlap. So if you can spend your resources fast enough, if you can spend your energy on those Tiger Palms fast enough, you can actually have multiples of these buffs overlapping, and this becomes a lot common during your burst opener, especially when you are so juiced up with haste. Outside of this, Shadowpan did get buffed up all across the board for all of the other little smaller talents, like One versus Many, for example. One versus Many, they buffed up it basically buffs up the effectiveness of Fist of Fury and Keg Smash towards your flurry charges, but they buffed the damage of both of the Fist of Fury and Keg Smash by 5%. Besides this, talents such as Efficient Training Damage Increase, which buffs up the damage of your energy spenders, which we talked before, or actually just I guess a couple of minutes earlier, about how Tiger Palm becomes a little bit more involved for Woundwalker with a tier set. Buffing the damage of that spender is actually quite nice, but also every 50 energy you spend reduces the cooldown of Storm Earth and Fire. The cooldown reduction did get changed, but the damage buff went up from 50% to 20%, which is actually kind of noticeable. Flurry Strikes recently is kind of went to scale a little bit differently when it comes to your energy. It used to be 400 energy had to be spent in order to proc Flurry Strikes, but reducing it down to 30 basically eliminates 2 more tiger palms that you had to do, which is so nice and so convenient, especially when you get to play into the darting hurricane, when you can get those like quick jab, rising sun kick, quick jab, fist of fury, and just kind of weave him as part of your rotation without having to spend a global. You do get to cycle through Shadow Pan, Wisdom of the Wall buffs very quickly. Passive talents such as Martial Precision, which simply lets you bypass a portion of enemy's armor, which is a very interesting stat that we don't really get to see utilized. Martial Precision now amped up from 10% armor bypass to 12%. That is, I imagine, going to be a significant increase. Certain talents such as if High Impact, for example, which has this like almost like a living bomb type of mechanic on the target. Enemies who die within 10 seconds are being damaged by flurry. Strikes explode, dealing physical damage to all uncontrolled enemies within 8 yards. This one is a very interesting talent that doesn't get nearly as much play, but they did amplify it a little bit, or rather they did increase the duration of this talent, just to make sure that that window of you striking the target and when they die with the debuff is a little bit more generous. Oh, and I guess I forgot to mention that apparently Wisdom of the Wall, the Shadow Flurry Strikes portion, actually that also has gotten buffed up recently. It's hard to tell exactly by how much, but the ability used to scale off of 100% of your attack power. Now it's 160% of your attack power. I'm not that great with numbers, so take it as you will. That has been improved, and if you just look into dungeon content and try this ability out, it is a significant gain. Like, I've never seen Flare Strikes be 7% of my overall damage, but when that proc hits, that proc really does hit, and it's a significant overall output. But all in all, Shadowpan actually now feels like a bit more of a complete package that starts to feel a little bit better to play with. While it's not necessarily as interactive as the Conduit of Celestials with its massive window of Celestial Conduit, which allows you to pulsate mad amounts of damage, then activate all of these Celestials, and every single one of them adds some kind of a gameplay component to your basic abilities and rotation. I mean, even Yulon gives you a little bit of a cooldown reduction component, which can be kind of amazing, to be honest, because if you are able to manage your resources quite well, again, skill expression is one of those things that a lot of people like to play with, and Monk, I feel like, is just chock full of it. That being said, Shadowpan now has gained a little bit of its own identity. Not only does it have a bit more flavor with a brand new animation that I don't think I've ever seen before, but it has a bit of this like haste components to it with Veteran's Eye, which stacks up rather quickly. Then you have the burst agility window with against all odds, and if you can cycle through flurry strikes, this one is provided as a buff for every flurry strikes, stack it up to 10 times, and you get 10 flurry strikes at once. So if you can chain them together, you can actually maintain quite a big burst window for a good bit, with 20% additional agility for a short moment, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. So there is still a bit of skill expression with Shadowpan, which is gonna end up being a little bit more weak or heavy. I think there's just a lot of little procs for you to track and watch out for. And I think that's what really is going to come down to Shadowpan, but there's still an opportunity for monks to have a bit of fun with it. Plus, this entire revamp that they've done over this expansion where monks have gotten so haste heavy has been very unusual. Just the basic gameplay of it all, not even just Shadowpan, but just monk Windwalker specifically gameplay. Going full haze builds is unusual, because as a monk, I don't remember last time I went full haze build, but it actually feels kind of good. And they found a way to make haste a bit more of an interactive ability. We mentioned earlier momentum boost, how it buffs up your Fist of Fury, the auto attacks effectiveness, and how that ends up being a little bit overall better for you because there's talents that play off of that gameplay. Then there also the cost of Tiger Palm got increased, which kind of artificially makes haste a little bit better of a stat, but it also makes your burst windows much better and a lot more punchy, a lot more active, and it's very fast paced, with monks having this very much structured, like you got a Tiger Palm, then Chi Spender, Tiger Palm, Chi Spender, and you're trying to maximize your energy spent, but also trying to maximize your Chi as best as possible. And the fast pace and the reaction time it takes when you got all of your cooldowns rolling in, plus you have the darting hurricane cutting off the global cooldown of your Tiger Palms by half. It's a very fast pace that it really has like a bit of that punch, a little bit of burst, essentially allow you to spend more time spending that Chi than having to waste the global generating that Chi, which is interesting. It is surprisingly effective, and I don't think I've ever seen a class transform in such a way as a Windwalker Monk. Again, historically, pace is a really bad stat for you, but they found a way to really make it work. And playing this class right now, it is incredibly fun. It feels like your highs, your burst damage is really high, but your lows are not nearly as low. previously, Windwalker has always been a very cooldown focused class where playing around Zuen, playing around your Storm, Earth, and Fire, that is how you got majority of damage out. And if you mess up your cooldowns, a good portion of your damage goes out of the window. But at least when it comes to dungeons, I felt like my damage numbers are really high during peak burst. But even outside of burst cooldowns, it is still fairly active, if anything. There's no real big downtime where I'm just waiting up until my cooldowns are available, because haste just gives you such an active base gameplay, and I really like seeing it out of this class altogether. Also, playing around with Zuen's Bond, even though the cooldown reduction for this ability isn't all that crazy, I actually did like the a little bit of that cooldown reduction shaving off for Zuen, and I felt like I was able to line up a charge of Storm, Earth, and Fire with Invoke Zuen more aggressively, where I'm not really having to hold the Storm, Earth, and Fire until Zuen is back up. I'm more trying to use the Storm, Earth, and Fire whenever some cooldowns are available, like whenever my Strike of the Windlord is up. So essentially I'll send it together with Zuen, and then I'll just kind of chill. And then when Strike of the Windlord is back up, I'll send this back up again. And by that time Storm, Earth, and Fire is back up, Zuen is coming off a cooldown, and it starts to synergize a little bit better. It feels like you don't have to really wait for your cooldowns to line them up as much, and having that shorter downtime in dungeons in particular, I think helps them out a ton. It's just overall been a very refreshing experience, and I was very much surprised by how good Windwalker has felt. And hopefully the class of Monk will continue to receive some favorable tuning and scaling, because it's definitely a lot of fun, and hopefully it'll retain this kind of stature that it has over in the beta, because if anything, I think it's definitely a class worth experiencing in the War Within. But with that being said, I do want to pass it out to you guys. What do you think about the class of the Monk in the comments down below? But with that being said, I do want to thank you guys so much for taking a close look with me into the Windwalker Monks over on the beta. And if you did enjoy this video, or if you found this or review informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very, very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community. Link to that in the description of every single video. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.